Welcome. I'm Gila Ross, host of the Power Up podcast. I'm a mum of 8, and one of the things I'm passionate about is sharing how much joy, positivity, and relevance Judaism offers our everyday modern lives. And on the Power Up podcast, I share short inspirational ideas that we can use in our everyday lives. As well, we also have a series on positive parenting. If you'd like to sponsor an episode in memory of a loved one or for the merit of someone or something, please email gilaross@gmail.com. In this episode, I'm so excited to speak with the warm, dynamic Yaffa Palti. Thank you so much, Yaffa, for joining us on the Power Up podcast. Really big treat to have you on here today, and I'm sure our listeners are in for a treat. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, what you do?
Sure. First of all, hi, Gila. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And hi to all the listeners. Nice to meet all of you. So my name is Yaffa Palti. I grew up in New York, and I'm going to make this as brief as possible. Okay. I grew up in New York, married my husband, who is from Mexico. We moved to Israel as soon as we got married, where my husband was studying to become a rabbi. So we lived there for 7 years. After that, we made a decision to move to Mexico, where my husband is from, because he was now a rabbi, and there were a lot of things in his community that, they didn't have any kind of spirituality over there. So we kind of felt like that was a good place for us to go. We felt Israel, we were living there, enjoying it there. I was teaching in all different seminaries. My husband, as I mentioned, he was studying and he was also teaching, and we were living an amazing life there and really giving whatever we were able to give to the community. But at that point, we realized there's no lack of good rabbis and Torah teachers in Israel, but there was a lack in Mexico. So we decided that was the right thing to do. We had to pick up and move. So, and of course, I was all idealistic. I'm like, Mexico, sure, I love tacos. Let's go for it, And we were hit with a lot more than tacos when we got there, to say the least. That's a story for a whole other time. But, we got to Mexico and things were not easy. It was a huge adjustment for me. I had to change. The language and the culture, and there were so many difficult things for me, and I lost my whole sense of self, and it was really a hard adjustment. But we stayed there 11 years, and there was a lot of work that we did there, and, building the community, and, it really was. And I thought I was going to just spend the rest of my life there. So I made a decision to make it work, and that was it. And again, as I mentioned, I'm simplifying a very, very profound time in my life that was complex and complicated. But in the end, that was my mindset. And we were there for 11 years. Until life, threw a curveball, and we were invited to San Diego, California, to build a community over there. So we built a shul, we built a community. We lived there for 3 years. And again, I thought, okay, so we're moving to San Diego. We'll just live here now forever. Like, I'm not the kind of person who needs to jump around from place to place. I love to be able to establish some stable roots somewhere, but this is the kind of life that, Hashem gave us. So we got there, and we realized that there was no Jewish infrastructure there for us. Like, there's no yeshiva, there's no kosher food, there's no real community. So even though we were building a community, but we were building a community of secular Jews, trying to bring them closer, to Torah. But meanwhile, we were the only Shomer Shabbat family in about 15 miles. You don't use miles in the UK.
We use miles.
Oh, yes. You do? Okay. Okay. So you get so you know what 15 miles is. That's huge. We were the only, so we had no one to talk to in terms of connection. My kids had no friends. Like, it was really, really difficult. And as I mentioned, no kosher food, no yeshiva. So we decided we can't live here. Like, there's a limit to the sacrifices that you make,
Yeah.
and for many, many, many reasons together, we decided that we could. It's interesting, by the way, because we were struggling a lot with living there in so many of these areas. Also, it was a wonderful, wonderful community. And both of us developed really great connections with some of the people till today. But they were in such a beginning stage of any kind of growth in their Judaism that it was way too small for us. Even though we were trying to build a community, my husband and I are both Torah teachers. We teach in depth, a high level of Torah learning. And it felt very, very amateur for us. Like there was no stimulation in it. So,
Right.
but it was a little bit of, and it was also difficult because a lot of the people in the community weren't really interested in growing through Torah. They just wanted to be culturally Jewish. So we kind of felt like we were wasting our potential being there. And I had this epiphany when I was in London. Actually, I was in London for a long weekend. I was giving lots of talks there. And Shabbos afternoon, I was walking through the streets of London and I was loving it. I was actually in tears. I was so emotional watching everyone do the walk. And everyone was coming home from shul and going to this house for a kiddush and that house for a kiddush. And it was so, so beautiful. I haven't seen that in so many years because I haven't lived in a concentrated Orthodox community. And it was so beautiful. And that's when I had this epiphany. It hit me all of a sudden. I was like, Yaffa, you don't have to stay in San Diego. You can leave, like you can move and you can have, be in more of a community for your family. That's when I had that epiphany. The second Shabbat was over. I called my husband. He was in California. So the time difference between London and California, he didn't get the message till the next morning, of course, by us. And that's when I said to him, we could leave. And that's when we started, we realized we're not married to this place because you always want to make something work, but you also have to know at what point are you sacrificing too much of yourself to make something work, and that's when we said we have to look for somewhere else. And it's a long story that I don't think we have time for, but that's how we ended up in Miami. And here we are. We've been in Miami for over a year and a half. We moved here shortly before COVID. And it's beautiful. We're loving the community and we're loving living here.
That's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, it's interesting. I'm listening to you and I can relate to so much of what you're saying. We lived in the country. We lived in Berlin, actually, which also was a different language. Yes. It is so hard to move to somewhere with a different language. And I also really when you said about sacrificing, right? We lived in Vancouver, Canada for 6 years and we loved it there. We were we were hoping to be there for good. And we got to that point as well where our kids, it's one thing to sacrifice for ourselves, but it's another to sacrifice for our kids, right? But I really hear what you're saying about, getting to that point where you realize I can be somewhere else. I don't have to sacrifice anymore. And perhaps the right thing now is not to sacrifice anymore. So tell me, I mean, you've made a lot of hard decisions in your life, listening to your very amazing story that I'm sure we all want to hear more of. How did you make those decisions? What gave you what did you have a certain mantra in your head? Did you what was the thought process that helped you make those hard decisions? Whether it was moving to Mexico initially or whatever it was.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. This has been the theme of my entire adult life. I grew up in New York, where I was surrounded by like-minded people. My whole community, everybody was Shomer Shabbat. We all had similar level of hashkafa. The schools that I went to, I always had friends. I was always popular. I don't have one of those stories of so when I was in school and I was bullied and everything in my life, not everything was perfect. My father was very sick and we had our own struggles and, there were things, but basically things were relatively easy. I never had to make a big sacrifice. I never had to make, go out of my comfort zone too much growing up. And when I was dating my husband, again, this is a huge story. I wish we had 3 hours together. So I'm not going to be able to get into the whole story. But when I was dating my husband, and again, remember, I was like the typical, not typical, because I was always an independent thinker. But if I wasn't, I don't think I could have made the decisions that I made, but I was a standard you know, FFB, you know, from birth, base Yaakov, New York girl. Okay. And I was dating all those guys that were the standard New York, Lakewood, maybe out of town, Baltimore kind of guys, right? And most of them were wonderful, but none of them were what I was looking for. Again, I was a little bit of more of an independent thinker and out of the box like that. And I was looking for someone who was more of a leader than a follower and somebody with a vision for life. I was passionate and driven, and I needed someone to fit into that category with me, you know, to have a vision in life. And I wasn't finding that in a lot of the guys I was dating. So people used to tell me all the time, go to Israel. You can't find the guy you're looking for in New York. You have to go to Israel. And I would tell them, no, I know that my place is in New York right now. My family needs me. My community needs me. I was very involved. And I said, Hashem knows my address. I don't have to start running around the world looking for this guy to marry. Hashem knows my address. He'll send him to me. And that was my standard response. And I really meant it. Now, again, I'm not going to get into all the details because I told you there's a lot of stuff. But at a certain point, I actually requested, I had this conversation with God, and I'm like, okay, listen, thank you for setting me up with all these guys. And there was no, you know, every week I was going out with another guy, and I appreciated it. But I said to God, I'm like, you know, I don't need that. Like for my self-esteem, it's all good. All I need is that one guy. I was getting really burnt out from dating everyone. And it was so hard to make all these decisions. And I was just, and it was, I was saying no to most of them, which didn't feel good, you know? And I said to God, just send me that one guy. I don't care. Let the phone call stop. I don't care. I'm good. And you know what? They stopped. I didn't get any more phone calls. And I actually felt like I was reviving myself a little bit because I was so burnt out from so much dating. And then 2 months passed without any phone calls, and I was feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. And then suddenly I get a phone call from someone, my friend, her name was Shandy. She calls me up and she goes, Yaffa, your husband is sitting on my couch. And I was like, what's he doing on your couch? Send him over. And that was the beginning of, she had met my husband. He was in Israel and he was visiting New York right before Pesach. And he was visiting some of his friends, families, and her brother was a good friend of my husband. So he walked into the house to meet his friend's family. And my friend was like, he's for Yaffa. So it was super cool how everything worked out. And he was only in New York he was there less than 2 weeks, and he ended up on my doorstep. I was like, I told you Hashem knows my address. It was an unbelievable, but here's the thing. Now, this is why I brought in this whole story. Was the beginning of this series in my life where I had to choose what was right over what was easy. This was like the beginning of what has become a mantra for me in life, to choose what's right over what's easy. Because even after I met my husband, it was very, very apparent to me, even on the first date, that this was finally the guy I was looking for. And intellectually, he was it. He was the one. On paper, I knew this was, you know, but emotionally, I had a really hard time allowing myself to connect to him. Because emotionally, I knew that if I married him, I was going to have to give up so like really pretty much everything in my life, because I knew that he would never live in New York. I didn't even think he would ever live in the US. Okay, hi, I'm in Miami today, but I didn't think, I was like, what is there for him in the US? He was this Mexican guy living in Israel. I was Ashkenaz, he was Sephardic. He had his whole world, his whole vision, his whole dream. He was gonna change Mexico. Like there was nothing, I knew I was gonna have to say goodbye to my family and friends pretty much forever. I was gonna have to change all of my customs from Ashkenaz to Sephardic. And like everything, even the type of food is different. You know, even the words and the prayers are different. And even, this is gonna sound silly, but the little tiny nuances of going from Good Shabbos to Shabbat Shalom, every little change was getting rid of a part of me, you know, and this recognition was so overwhelming for me. I was 21 years old, young to have to make such a huge life decision, you know, changing everything. And therefore I had a really hard time allowing myself to connect emotionally, because I knew, I said, if I marry him, it's going to be major, major life-changing for me. Wow. And that was when I had this internal conflict of, Yaffa, this is what you asked for. Like literally, you had this conversation with God. He answered your prayers like never, like to word for word. And here you are, like you're gonna slap God in the face just because you don't want to make some changes in your life. That was my like inner dialogue. And I finally said, and of course, again, this is a long, long story, but I asked Hashem to send me some signs. I'm like, okay, God, fine, but you have to send me signs. I was very demanding, and I got one sign that was super powerful. And I was like, okay, fine, not enough. Not good enough. I need more. And I got like one sign after the other until I realized the arrow is so clear. I have no more excuses. Like, that's it, And I said, I need to make this decision. And I did. And I said, I'm going to choose. It would have been so easy for me to just say, no, I don't need to have to go through so much difficulty in my life. I knew that one day Spanish would become a big part of my life, like everything. I was like, why? What do I need it for? I could just do what's easy, stay in New York, marry a guy who's not such a big visionary, fine, but I'll be comfortable. And I realized that's not what I'm in this world for. If I want to make a difference in the world, in the Jewish people, do something big, it comes with a sacrifice. And that was my first time that I remember having to choose what was right over what was easy. And it was very, very hard. And then that, as I mentioned, kind of became my theme. So when we had to leave Israel to move to Mexico, it was the same thing. We finally got comfortable. It was a big adjustment to move to Israel. The first 3 years were super hard. Finally, we were there and I was loving it. And I was using so many of my strengths and my talents and connecting with everyone. And it was an incredible, few years. Until I realized once again, I have to choose what's right over what's easy. This time Mexico was calling, So that was the decision to go to San Diego. Even though I was, between you and me, I was secretly super excited to leave Mexico and go back to the US. I was really, really looking forward to that. But the bottom line is, it was another hard decision for my kids, my family, everything, So that is really the mantra of how I live my life. You can do what's easy or you can do what's right.
That is, I love it. It's like so powerful, choosing what's right over what's easy. It's like, I think it's such a powerful mantra. And, you said that when it comes to big decisions, but the truth is, even small decisions, if we want anything in life, right? Like choosing right over choosing easy, it's any decision, anything worthwhile that we want to accomplish is
100%. 100%, even small decisions, even the way you react to your husband or to your children. You can have the easy response, which is to get upset or frustrated, or you can do what's right and say, 1 second, I'm picturing short-term gratification or long-term pleasure, long-term happiness, right? What am I looking at? I need to stop and do what's right instead of what's easy, right? And you can apply any example to this. Eating, how much am I getting, am I 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, am I going to reach for the ice cream? And if I do, will I eat the entire thing of ice cream or will I, what am I going to do? It's easy to just eat out of control or say something out of control. It's right to know where your boundaries are.
Yeah, it's true. That is so true and so powerful. Yeah, for any tips that you would like to give to our listeners for, and I'm sure all of us, as touched as I am by that powerful mantra that you just shared with us, choosing right over choosing easy, if we want to incorporate it into our lives, and as you say, it goes into all areas, it goes into how we wake up and how we relate to our people, and it goes into our Jewish journeys as well, in taking the steps in Judaism wherever we are. What tips do you have to share with us of how we can incorporate that mantra into our life and into our decision-making process in our lives?
Meaning, what are the steps that need to be taken to learn to choose what's right over what's easy? Is that what you're asking? Like how to get to that place?
Yes. How do we get to that place where we can actually choose what's right over what's easy?
Okay, well, first of all, I think that we first have to know how to differentiate between what's right and what's easy, right? I think that we need to distinguish between the different voices that go on in our brains pretty much all day throughout the day. I think I would categorize it as 3 different voices, right? There's the voice of the heart, there's the voice of the ego, and there's the voice of the soul. And how do we know the difference between these voices? So the voice of the heart always wants what feels good. The voice of the ego always wants what looks good. And the voice of the soul always wants what is good. And this is the distinction between them. When you know, when you are stuck making a decision, right? When you're stuck with, or you're in a place where you have a choice to choose how to respond, how to react, what to do, where to go. And again, bigger decisions about who to marry and where to live and what school to send your kids to, or the smaller decisions about how to live your day-to-day life, how to respond to people, what to do. If we understand that the voice of the heart that only wants what feels good in the moment, that wants me to do what I'm in the mood of doing right now, or that's the voice of desires, the voice of instant gratification. This is a voice that is finite, since it's body related, and therefore it is only going to bring us momentary, short-term pleasure and gratification. But if we can differentiate and say, 1 second, what's this voice talking to me? Is this a voice that is coming because I want to do what's fast or fun or easy, or again, what I feel like doing in this moment? Or is this a voice that's coming to me with logic and telling me, you know what the right thing is to do? Do you want to be right now? You're talking to your husband and he's wrong and you need to be right. Or do you care about your relationship? And do you really want your relationship to be long lasting? Then maybe it's time to stop reacting and to think about, what is the right decision to make right now? How should I speak? What should the next words out of my mouth be? Right? So I think if we can distinguish between those voices and know, stop and think for a minute. It's really, a lot of it is about being mindful in the moment, right? And being proactive instead of reactive. Then I think we can help ourselves make those right decisions. That's number one. Number two is understanding that the world is so much bigger than us, and not everything is about me. Not everything is about me. Not everything is personal, right? Believe it or not.
Hold on a second. You heard it here first.
This is mind-blowing.
The world is not about me.
The world is not about me. And the world is not here to serve me. The world is not out to get me. It's not about me at all, right? The world, I always tell this to people, the world was here before you. It owes you nothing, right? We feel like that, this sense of entitlement that everything has to be catered to me, and I deserve. And that is detrimental. Deserve to me is like, I feel like it's the most dangerous word, because once we feel like we deserve something, then when we don't get it, we feel deprived. That leads to bitterness. It's like the antithesis to gratitude. And gratitude is the key to more blessing and the key to real happiness, right? Understanding that everything I have is a blessing. I don't have it because I deserve it. So realizing that there is a much, much bigger portion of the world than my own little corner in it. And I am here to contribute to the world, not to take from the world. So right away, when we have that mindset and that understanding, it helps us choose what's right over easy, because what's easy is usually about me. It's about what's going to make me feel good, right? What's going to bring me pleasure and fulfill my desires and fill my needs. No, there's much bigger needs out there that we have the responsibility to fill. So we have to make that distinction between what's my right and what's my responsibility. And once we have that clearly distinguished and understood, then it's much, much easier to make a decision that comes from a place of giving rather than getting, right? A place where we can contribute instead of feel entitled and need to receive.
Thank you. Wow. You've given us so much to think about, so many valuable tools. I really love especially what you said about, listening to the different voices. So I think that can really help us in our decision-making skills. I wish we had hours and hours and hours and hours to spend together, but our listeners can connect with you on Instagram. You're at what is your Instagram handle?
Yeah, sure. They can connect with me on Instagram. It's at Yaffa Palti. I keep it simple. It's easy to find me. That would be the best way for them to connect with me, for sure.
Right. Thank you again so much for sharing your wisdom with us, Yaffa. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me and for being here with me. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you got as much out of this episode as I did. And if you did, take a moment and share it with a friend who may also benefit from Yaffa's wisdom. And subscribe to the podcast to hear future episodes. For sponsorship opportunities, get in touch with gilaross@gmail.com. Thank you and have a wonderful day.